Please join me in welcoming Gregg to the stage.
Thank you, Elizabeth, and thank you all for being here this morning. In the space business, we have a concept called launch window. If you're trying to match up with the space station and you're taking off from Cape Canaveral, you've got to launch at a very particular time when the space station is in the same inclination as you. And if you miss it, you might have to wait half a day. If you're going to the moon and you miss your launch window, you might have to wait 2 weeks or even a month. But what you do has a much more constrained launch window. If you don't provide health services to this human being right now, this child, their lives may be inexorably changed for the worse. So we need lots of innovation throughout our culture, but you need it more than anybody. You deserve to avail yourself of all the possible ways to accelerate innovation. Let me see a show of hands. How many people believe we should accelerate innovation? How many people believe, anybody who believes in telekinesis, raise my hand. There's at least one. Of course, we're seeing innovation, in the healthcare field. This one caught my eye in Harvard Business Review about how Apple is putting together a de facto coalition to share medical records, which is a very big deal. But we need more, and we need it more rapidly. And fundamentally, innovation is a race against time. How can we get more innovation accomplished per unit time? So I'm going to suggest to you 3 techniques, 3 verbs actually, that you might employ to think about accelerating innovation. The first one is surf. Somehow when I think of San Diego, this came to mind. Surf what? Surf the exponentially changing trends in technology that are happening. And of course, this is the easy one because everybody's doing this anyway to some degree. And what do we mean by exponential? We mean rapid doubling times compared with a relatively straight line thing. And our brains are wired to see straight line linear change when in fact right now we're enmeshed in multiple exponential change. And people started waking up to this around the Second World War when we started having really large-scale mass production of things like airplanes, like one of these every few hours, for example. And the concept is that the more you do something, the better you get at it. That's called the learning curve. And the best and most well-known example of the learning curve is named after the guy in the middle of those 3. The triumvirate of people that studied Intel. The guy in the middle is Moore, Gordon Moore of the Intel Corporation. And he made an observation that in integrated circuits, the number of transistors per circuit was doubling every 18 months. And that was his observation. And it has now acquired the name Moore's Law. Nobody is more, I think, bemused by that than Gordon Moore himself. The interesting thing, though, is that expectation of continuing the doubling of goodness in those circuits has continued, and nobody wants to be the person who fails to meet that expectation. And we will probably see it continue for a long time. It'll stop being in silicon, it'll be optical and other things, but that is continuing. And it's hard to actually perceive the power of rapid doubling, but here it is shown as stacks of coins, 1, 2, 4, 8, 16, etc. And you get radical change in a fairly short time. Ray Kurzweil, who's the real co-founder of Singularity University, along with my partner Peter Diamandis, I'm just one of the old faculty members. Ray pointed out that actually Moore's Law, which is in this domain here, happened before that in the information world, even before integrated circuits, we saw the same doublings happening first with Hollerith punch card machines, then the old relay computers. If whenever you see science fiction and the computers are kind of clicking and stuff, it's because in the 50s they clicked with relays. Tubes and transistors are silent and not really fun to listen to because you don't hear anything. But in fact, Moore's law is sort of the fifth phase of an ongoing information paradigm. And everybody in this room is of an age that we've lived through. We're all beneficiaries of this very, very dramatic change, from giant mainframes to the power of 50 mainframes on the phone that's in all of our pockets right this minute. People don't realize that even my beat-up old iPhone 6, I think I have, that was a craze 7 years ago. It's insane. And for people that are even a little bit older, it's hard to believe that there was a time when everybody didn't know this stuff. But people like the head of IBM thought maybe, there'll be 5 computers in the world. And your neighbors up the coast utterly changed that when they came out with the first consumer computer product. I remember when that came out. And it had a really profound effect. Transistors, the basis for modern computing, were actually very expensive and exotic. Back in the 50s, this was the first transistorized consumer product, and it cost about $350 in today's money. I remember when transistor radios would proudly have imprinted in the case, in plastic, the number of transistors. 6 transistors, whoa, well that's because the transistors were expensive. I got these numbers from Intel a few years ago, about 10 years ago. In 1959, the cost to the manufacturer of each of these discrete transistors was about $6. And guess how many transistors you got for that money when I got these numbers 10 years ago? 500,000. And today it's more than 1 million. Big change. And things like the Apple and the subsequent personal computer revolution dramatically lowered the cost. And this creates a sort of doubling of, not just the low cost allows more implementation, more experimentation, and then you get even better results. So what if the most important technical thing in the work you do today were to be 10 times or 1,000 times or 1,000,000 times cheaper? Is it possible? Yeah, it is possible. In fact, in your area, in the healthcare area, you're seeing way better than Moore's law performance in some things. This is by the way, if you plot on a logarithmic chart, exponential change, it looks like a straight line. So this line along the top is Gordon Moore's law. And something magic happened around 2007. The cost of getting genomics accomplished, genomics decoding accomplished, suddenly took off at a rate much faster. The cost went way down compared to Moore's law, which messed up one of our XPrizes, which is kind of fun. Now, why is it that we are sometimes surprised by exponential development, even in our own fields and especially in other people's fields? Well, the answer is that if this is sort of normal linear improvement and progress, what happens with exponential stuff is at first, it's not all that exciting. In fact, it might even be worse than the existing way of doing business. But when it suddenly pokes its nose out of the water, the rate seems like magic. Surprise, it jumps up at you. And if you're not ready for it, you see it as disruption of your business. Time to change your plans. I'll give you an example of this. This is the price history of photovoltaic cells over my career lifetime. It's about a 200-time decrease in cost. And this is in dollars per watt. So no one in their right mind, unless you were operating a satellite or a very remote weather station, would bother to use solar cells to power it. It would be stupid. Right? However, when you plot this in time, this is cost of various sources of conventional fossil energy along these first ones, including liquid natural gas and coal, various kinds of oil. That funny looking line that looks like a child with a crayon kind of went on this slide is the decreased in solar just in the last few years. So you could be excused, unless you were a practitioner in this field, even if you were a practitioner, you could be excused by saying, well, yeah, solar's really not all that important, because it wasn't until the day before yesterday. But now it's cheaper. So everything changes, and it seems to change magically. So that's what's happening with just the surf verb. Surf these changing technologies, but be aware that some of them may sneak up on you. So you especially if it's not your precise field, find out what's going on. The second notion I'd like to leave with you today is dig for ideas that are already out there. It may be that your next giant paradigm-changing activity was invented 50 years ago, but it wasn't ready for prime time because of market conditions or some adjacent technology. This gentleman is a student of mine named Jason Dunn. He's the Chief Technology Officer for a company called Made in Space. And they are doing things. He's in an airplane, being in weightless. Some of us were talking about this earlier. It's great fun. I've done it. My staff has a picture of me doing this. It says, I lost 80 kilograms in 10 seconds without dieting, and I feel fine. Ask me how. What he's doing is he's testing a 3D fabricator, a printer, and they use them on space station now. So Jason and his partners send up a file to a machine that's on the space station, and they make tools for the astronauts and other magic things. It's like a magic box. Boom. So they can send stuff to space without actually having to build the thing on the ground and launch it. So 3D printing, wonderful stuff. A lot of people first started hearing about it about 10 years ago. But guess what? It's old technology. In fact, the first patents in the US were about 1994, and there's actually a Japanese patent from 1980. There was a Japanese lawyer, by the way, who was making stereolithography stuff in Japan. And I have found the work of a man at MIT, did his master's thesis on making something that people are just now talking about doing, making complete circuit assemblies, radios. He was making radios by something akin to 3D printing, but using linotype metal as the working fluid in 1940. So dig for sleeper technologies and ideas that are out there waiting already for you. They're on the shelf someplace. But you have to have, basically, these are hard to do from literature searches. What you need to do is find geezers who've been around in the field. And this has happened to DARPA lots of times recently. I know DARPA is thinking about doing some hypersonics research, and they're looking at the cost of building a hypersonic wind tunnel, and then they find out that there's a 85-year-old guy from McDonnell Douglas Corporation who has the files on when they did that stuff in 1967. So this stuff exists, but you've got to dig for it. I'll give you an example. This is a 1970s illustration of a 1960s idea. Rockets today, you all know what rockets look like. You've got some big tank of fuel, and you burn that fuel to make it hot, and when it gets hot, it comes out the back end, and whoosh, up you go. Well, what if you were not limited to the energy contained in the chemistry of what you throw out the back end? That's what this idea shows. You've got some lasers on the ground, and you're hitting the rocket's a big tank of water or alcohol or some other cheap stuff, and whoosh, it is maybe 1,000 times cheaper than what we do today. Well, this idea has been around forever in the space business, more than 60 years. It's only now starting to be done. This is Professor Lake Mirabeau at Rensselaer Polytechnic with what he calls a light craft. And these are actual pictures of, time-lapse pictures of a pulse laser propelling this is his daughter holding one of the small working models that they're launching in white sands. I flew right over this on the way to see you folks. And this will lead to hyper-Uber, where I want to go see my kid in Japan. I go out to the parking lot, punch the button, this lands. 50 minutes later, I'm in central Japan. We know how to do it today. The technology to do it essentially exists. Now, we need some big implementations to make it happen, but it can happen. So there are dramatic, paradigm-changing technologies out there if you're willing to dig. But the big one is ignite your own revolution. You know better than anybody else what changes are necessary if you want to have a big branching point, if you want to change the world. And then figure out how to make those changes happen. Give you some examples. We're all accustomed now to being able to go to an airport, get on a plane, and be on the other side of the world in the same day. It's not even considered exotic anymore. And that's largely because of this event. In 1927, with the help of artisans just down the street here in the fish canning district, Charles Lindbergh, young airmail pilot based in Missouri, where I presently live, changed the way everyone in the universe, at least in the known universe, thought about flying. Within a year of his New York to Paris flight, the number of pilots in America triples. The number of airplanes licensed in America goes up fourfold. And here's the amazing number. The number of people buying commercial tickets in this country within 18 months of his flight went up 30-fold. He flipped everybody's bit flip switch about innovation. So, in comparison with the even super dramatic exponential curve, there's something that's faster. And that's when you change everyone's belief instantly. That's a step change. Happens rarely. But actually, if you look at history, there are sequential step changes that actually drive some of these curves. So if you like the fact that you could be on the other side of the planet in the same day, thank this man. Not the tall guy. This guy. Who is that? That's the reason that Lindbergh made his 1927 flight. That's Raymond Ortigue. Raymond Ortigue was a Frenchman. He was a French shepherd boy, and his grandma said, you know what? There's a lot more opportunity in America. And as a teenager, he came to the United States, started working as a busboy in a hotel, the Brevoort Hotel in Manhattan, wound up owning that hotel and another hotel. And he wrote a one-sentence, one-paragraph note to the Aero Club of America, which is the reason we can all be on the other side of the planet on the same day, and that's the note he wrote. He offered a prize of $25,000 in 1919, and nobody won that prize. It was offered for 5 years, so he extended it for another 5 years. And it was won by Charles Lindbergh. And I just found this the other day when I was putting this talk together. This is something that Christie's auctioned. It was a map of Lindbergh's flight path compared to the sea lanes of the Atlantic route. And Lindbergh did some notes on it and signed it, and I don't remember what it sold for. But that was very exotic. He was the first person to ever fly that exact path. Well, this is a typical day. This was generated by the web about 4 days ago of what was going on a day. And you can see that in terms of transoceanic paths, it's the most populated path. But these are real flights on an average day. So some of us who were very frustrated by the pace of space activity, and the reason we're frustrated is that we understand that the Earth is an island surrounded by an ocean of energy and material resources in space. So we're not in a zero-sum game, even though that's what people tell us. People like the Club of Rome who say your kids will have less than you and their kids will have less than them and we'll have a more regimented world, more totalitarian. Baloney! Because they refuse to accept the fact that we're surrounded by, it's not a zero-sum game now. All our energy comes from our handy-dandy star, 8 light minutes away. Anyway, the problem is, how do you get the cost down of getting out of the Earth's deep gravity well to get out into free space so you can use that energy and material resources to benefit the Earth? So how could we ignite a completely different way of spaceflight? So we started asking ourselves questions. What if we could get the cost of getting out of the Earth's gravity well down by 10 or 100 or 1,000 times? What if there were markets completely different than the telecommunications market, which is the principal one even today? And the big one is, what if we could get new players in the game? Because everybody knew that only governments could do spaceflight. And that was the killer that was stopping us in our industry. And it led to this chicken and egg problem. And look for chicken and egg problems. They're a good sign that you could do something about it. The chicken and egg problem in our case was space flight's too expensive because we don't do enough of it. It's a market problem. Well, why don't we do enough of it? Because it's too expensive. So how do you break that cycle? It's hard. Well, we chose to do it by taking a page from history, the Lindbergh saga, and offering an Orteig Prize-like prize, which we called the X Prize. We called it X Prize because we didn't have a sponsor yet. So, it was sort of an algebraic term. By the time we did have sponsors, they liked the name. Apparently because it's in every marketing school everywhere, they talk about brand X. I don't know. It has actually become a brand. So we offered this cool trophy and $10 million to the first private team that would fly a 3-person ship to space altitude and repeat that feat within 2 weeks. And we had no idea what would happen. We thought it would be easy to raise the money, the $10 million, because we didn't have it when we suggested we were. We were honest about that, but actually nobody asked us. They just assumed we had the money. We thought it would be easy to raise the money and hard to find teams, and we had it exactly bass-backwards. By the time we were done, we had 26 teams in 7 different countries. We had no idea which technology would be used to win. In fact, it turned out to be this one down in the corner here. We didn't know, and we didn't care. We're technology agnostic. We just want the solution. And this turned out to be the solution. This is Brian Binney standing on Spaceship 1. And Spaceship 1 here shown with its tail feathers bent up, which automatically orients it for reentry, which is a very cool thing. In fact, they won another prize, the Collier Trophy, which is the highest award in sort of aviation design for this innovation. And this is what it looked like when he touched down at Mojave Airport in 2004 on the second of 2 space flights in the campaign to win the X Prize. And this is actually us giving $10 million to Paul Allen, who scarcely needs it, but Paul funded Burt Rutan to create a company called Mojave Aerospace Ventures. Actually, Burt is a famous airplane designer, head of scaled composites at the time. And this is my partner, on the end, Peter Diamandis, over there. And this is Bob Weiss, whose scientific documentaries you are familiar with if you've seen The Blues Brothers of the Naked Gun. He's actually, I ran the X Prize for its first 10 years, and Bob ran it for about a 9-year stint, which just ended about a year ago. So more on that at break if you want to ask me questions. And in the one piece of poetic justice that I've experienced in my career, hanging wingtip to wingtip with the Spirit of St. Louis, which saga gave us the idea of igniting our own revolution in spaceflight, is Spaceship One. They hang above Neil and Buzz's capsule and John Glenn's capsule and next to the first supersonic airplane in the Holy of Holies. And this morning, as we were walking into this hall, this was hopefully happening. I haven't had a text since, but this is Spaceship 2. They need a better naming system. Spaceship 1 could hold any 3 of us. We'd be a little bit cramped. But this thing's a lot bigger. It has 2 pilots and room for 6 passengers, and the passengers can unbelt and play in zero-G for a few minutes when they're in the apex of their flight. And they were planning this morning, I had word from their team, 31-second engine burn. So this is what Richard Branson bought the intellectual property from Paul Allen to start Virgin Galactic. And he's not alone. Jeff Bezos' company Blue Origin might actually beat Sir Richard to commercial operations with people with this ship, which is called New Shepard, and has had a bunch of flights and very successful. And I hope all of you got a chance to see our former X Prize director, Elon Musk, pull this off a few weeks ago. It looks like 1950s science fiction, only it's prettier. simultaneously landing those 2 side boosters on Falcon Heavy. And this vehicle, the whole system that includes these booster rockets, is now going to bring the cost down of launch to about $1 a gram, which is a big deal. Huge deal. We shall see. Now, we now employ X prizes in other areas besides just space-related ones. For example, we have a prize going on right now, where finalists in Tanzania are teaching young children to read and write and do basic math on Android phones. And the idea is you won't be able to buy it. Every Android phone that's sold in a couple of years will have the winner's software embedded on it because it'll cost about 20 cents to do that. And when you're done with your phone, you'll give it to an organization which will give it to a child, and that child is in a place where there are no teachers. And she will or he will learn to read and write and do basic math using that software. This is we teamed up with Qualcomm here in town to offer the Qualcomm tricorder X Prize. Some of us are big Star Trek fans. We won't say who. I will say that if you come to Missouri, if Spock were to come to Missouri in the summer, he would say, "Live long and perspire." But the idea was we're all carrying magic in our pockets. I mean, literally, Arthur Clarke said, any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. Well, our pocket communicator / supercomputers are magic. And to get people to utilize that magic to address healthcare issues was the goal of our tricorder X Prize. Oops, and here we are awarding it. There's Peter again, and there's Bob. Whoops, there's the guy that played the holographic doctor on Star Trek, Bob Picardo, giving the first prize award here in town about a year ago. So X Prizes are really about time. What they are about is incentivizing massively parallel innovation and leveraging that, because for every dollar you put up in a prize, you might get hundreds or thousands of dollars of effort by other people. I was telling one of our guests this morning that my second favorite definition is the definition of diplomacy. It's the art of letting others have your way. They said, "What's your favorite one?" I said, "It's a definition of a Freudian slip. It's when you say one thing but you mean your mother." But getting others to have your way, and your way is to provide health care here in your community. There are many people that will help you with your task if you provide the proper incentives. And the incentive might be nothing more than to say, here's a tough challenge. We dare you to solve it. It doesn't have to have a big money. The reason our first prize was $10 million was because nobody knew who Peter Diamandis and Gregg Maryniak were, so we had to give some money. We had to get some money. That was harder. So let's review those 3 verbs that I promised you. Surf. Surf the innovations not just in your field, but in adjacent fields. And that's hard to do because the speed of progress in those adjacent fields, even in your own field, may be hard to detect. So find the best people who know exactly what's going on at the boundaries of knowledge and get that data from them. Dig. Don't forget to do archaeology, because some of those ideas, ones that might transform what you're trying to do right now, may already exist, may have existed for 50 years. And the most powerful of all is ignite. Do it yourself. Figure out what needs to be done. And that's not so easy. That's actually a difficult thing to do. So here's a starter for you. Ask yourself the question, what would happen if, fill in the blank, your main obstacle, process, whatever, were many times less expensive? And be particularly alert for areas where there is a chicken and egg problem, where there's a myth, a belief, especially one that you know is truly a myth, that's preventing revolutionary change in the delivery of something of your critical services. And then this is the hard part. Figure out what's the smallest demonstration that if it happens, everybody will then believe that things are different. What's the equivalent of your New York to Paris flight or your Ansari X Prize flight to space? That if it takes place, then everybody will say, oh, of course commercial companies can supply the space station. That's what happened with XPrize. That's why Elon was successful, because his company was just barely hanging on because there's not a very big satellite launching market at the time. But NASA was sufficiently, they said, we'll use the fact of this XPrize as top cover, make a $500 million bet that private companies can supply station, and they did it. So it took the demonstration. What's a demonstration that you can incentivize? That if everybody could see this physical thing, they would think in a different way. So thank you for remaining conscious this morning. I look forward to continuing the discussions we started before the talk. I'll be around during your breaks. Thank you very much.